Well, here's something that students often don't think of. This advice is for them to apply early and often for both funding and for awards. They often think that they don't have the right background to get some kind of funding or some kind of award, but I think they often don't realize how competitive they are, and that there are a wide variety of organizations, psychological and otherwise, who are really looking for good students to support. And so I think if they just take a little time to write up the applications for the funding and the awards, they'll find that they're successful a lot more often than they think, and obviously it looks great on their CV. The other piece of advice I'd like to give is that students join up early on the local and national psychological organizations like the American Psychological Association, and of course Division 38 Health Psychology, and something like Society of Behavioral Medicine. These groups are really supportive of students. They offer a lot of activities that help students move forward in their careers, including funding and awards. And also students are able to network. And I think students often don't realize how valuable networking is, especially when you start it early.
So I do think about where does that student want to be in terms of a career? Not that he or she necessarily knows, but where would he or she like to be? What kind of a setting, doing what kind of work? And then in order to get into that position, what kind of a postdoc is going to best prepare that person? And in order to get to that type of postdoc, what is going to make that individual, what internship is going to make that individual most competitive for that particular postdoc? And then what would that internship look like? And then if you just bring it back to what's happening at the doctoral level, what kind of doctoral training is going to help prepare that student to move into that kind of internship? So I do think of that progressive process. But at the same time, I also recognize that student doesn't know where he or she's going to be in 5 years, that those paths really change, or in 10 years, or in 20 years. So that's where I think there's a real importance of exposure to all aspects of psychology, even if there's an intention to be focused specifically in health psychology or in an area within health psychology. Because that exposure not only informs a career going forward, but it might be something that that student 10 years into a career might have to rely back on. And so sometimes I do think students rush to become specialized. And I do think there's an advantage in some ways because it can distinguish them in terms of their record. But I also think it is at a cost, and that cost is they sometimes don't have the broad exposure and broad training. So I just think it's important to try to keep a perspective that what they're doing at that moment, may or may not lead them to where they're going to be for that next moment and where they will be later on in their career.
So I'd say, one, get a great mentor. Two, I guess keep focused on what you really love about what you do. And so sometimes that changes over the course of your career. Sometimes you feel particular demands in terms of getting funding, that you should be studying one thing or something different than what you're really interested in. I think ultimately if you stay true to what brought you to the field and are aware enough to evaluate what continues to drive you, what you continue to be committed to, then I think that creates a lifelong kind of passion about